Et donc, je vous propose donc d'écouter la présentation suivante qui va porter donc sur l'Advanced Care Planning, qui, quoi et pourquoi. Et donc, une présentation du docteur Michael Connolly, que je vais appeler à me rejoindre. Vous êtes doctorant, professeur assistant UCD à l'École de sciences infirmières, de sage-femme et de système de santé, directeur du programme diplôme d'études supérieures, titulaire d'une maîtrise de sciences en soins palliatifs, donc à l'University College de Dublin. Je vous passe tout de suite la parole pour votre présentation, puis nous aurons bien sûr un temps d'échange.
Merci, Hélène. Good morning, everyone. I unfortunately don't have the good grace of having French as a second language, so I'll be speaking to you in English. May I thank Anne, Madame la Présidente, for her kind invitation, along with Lynn Sulov. And it's great to be here with a sister organisation. I currently am the president of the Irish Association for Palliative Care. For some, it's a good thing I finished my term of office after 2 years as president next Wednesday, the 18th of October, at our annual general meeting. I'd also like to acknowledge my colleagues who were part of the EAPC task force that wrote the white paper recommendations for advanced care planning. In particular, Ida Kruger and Judith Regens from the Netherlands, who led us and co-chaired that working group so splendidly over 2 years, which got us to the point of having a white paper with recommendations. And I have to say, as an academic, I took great pleasure in having a paper received graciously into the Lancet Oncology. That was a big yay for me as a nurse. So, a little bit about me. I'm a nurse. I trained in the west of Ireland, which is on the map of Ireland to the very left, where my home house looked out onto the Atlantic Ocean. I trained in a university hospital there, and I had the good fortune of living in Galway whilst also being a student, so I didn't have to worry about the cost and expense. The problem with being from the west of Ireland, and also it's something to do with being a redhead, because I have two sisters who are redheads, is that I tend to speak very quickly. Philip, who's a colleague for the last 20 years, will know, because he made his home in Ireland, in the west of Ireland, that we in the west, we talk a lot, we talk fast, and we can have 3 conversations going at the very same time. So please forgive me if I go too quickly, and those of you who are translating, please shout at me to slow down if I'm going too fast. But I've lived and worked in Dublin since 1994. When you come from the west of Ireland and you pass through a place called Athlone, which is in the centre of Ireland, you pass over the Shannon River, which is the longest river in Ireland. And those of us who go back home, we stop on the western side of the Shannon, we get out of our cars and we kneel and kiss the ground because we're re-entering real Ireland. So much so that living in Dublin, I have yet to be given a passport to say that I live and am a Dub. I'm still considered outside the Pale, which was the old Dublin wall, where those who weren't Dubs weren't allowed to live inside. I work in University College Dublin, and to confuse everybody, we changed our name about 10 years ago to UCD Dublin, University College Dublin, Dublin. It's an Irish solution to an international problem, because when you Google UCD, you got University College Deakin, which is in California, and we were trying to up our ante with regards to Google hits. So our registrar at the time decided to put Dublin in our title. So UCD Dublin, yeah, Dublin, yeah. It's an Irish solution to an international problem. But the school I work in is the oldest and largest university school of nursing, midwifery and health systems in Ireland. We have over 1,300 students, and last week we got the head count for our because our term starts on the 10th of September. So as of last Friday, we have 1,488 students who are nurses, midwives, undergraduate, postgraduate, and research scholars. So we're very proud of that. We also are one of 2 universities in the Republic of Ireland who run an interdisciplinary program at graduate level for palliative care. My own school, which myself and Philip founded that program, and Trinity College Dublin, which is the big opposition, but you know, we can live with them. We're in the same city. So the focus of my presentation is really the context of the who, what, and why of advanced care planning. And I'd like to share with you some examples from Ireland and our experience, but also make reference to the work we did as part of the working group for the EAPC. And I suppose the first question we think about is that when we hear the term advanced care planning, what comes to mind? Is our first thought health and planning my care for health? Is it the first thought it's about choice? Is the first word or sentiment that comes to mind when I talk about advanced care planning death and dying, even in a world that is death denying? I commented to colleagues yesterday that I facilitated a workshop with that. I really get annoyed when I hear people referred to as having passed away. No, they died. It's one of two certainties we have in life, is that we're going to die. The other is taxes. Thanks to Ben Franklin for telling us that. So is it about planning? And what is it we are planning? Is it about our finances and whether we can afford to have the care we want? I think it's a myriad of words. I think it's a myriad of sentiments. And the problem when we mention the thing about advanced care planning is that it throws up more questions than answers. And I know in France you have a piece of legislation which supports advanced care directives and also supports the use of palliative sedation. But I would argue that the advanced care directive is this end of a process that starts over here with a conversation, which is about advanced care. And I would argue that the care we're talking about isn't just health care, it's social care. It's planning for my future and even thinking about downsizing. I live in a townhouse that has 3 flights of stairs to get to my bedroom. I'm already planning on downsizing to somewhere where I can take an elevator and have no stairs, so I don't have to worry about stairs, etc. I argue that we plan for the big things and the little things. We plan birthdays. I'm already in the process of planning my sister's birthday next February because my significant 0 birthday is the following February. So if I do a good job on hers, my family might reciprocate by giving me a good celebration. We plan weddings. I was in the happy position of having to plan 2. I am in the club with Liz Taylor and others. I've married the same person twice. First because Michael, which is really confusing because my husband is Michael as well, we had our civil partnership. And then Ireland, the first country in the world, voted to legalise in our constitution and to redefine marriage between 2 people who love each other, irrespective of gender. So 5 years later, we had our civil marriage. So I get to celebrate the day we met, the day we had our civil partnership, and the day we married, all in the same 2 days. So I'm never going to forget our anniversary. We plan holidays. And we tend to do that the first day we arrive back from our last. Would you agree? Because we think, oh, I need a holiday after that holiday. I really did do too much sightseeing, ate too much, drank a little too much. But, you know, we plan family. We plan if we want to have a baby. And sometimes, yes, sometimes we plan for the future. And we do a lot of planning. But do we take time to consider planning for the unexpected? What happens if I have an accident? What happens if I get diagnosed with an illness that's going to curtail my quality of life, that's going to see me need intervention on a regular and continued basis, and even that I might be diagnosed with an illness that is terminal, that is going to result in my death? Do we plan for when we're the patient as opposed to the carer, the professional, the non-paid carer, which are really important? Do we plan for those things? Do we consider? I would suggest that we don't plan until it happens, and then it's sometime too late. In Ireland, we're guided by 3 really good pieces of work with regards to having the conversations and deciding our future. The document to your left is the legislation which was published and enacted in some forms. In Ireland, we tend to have a piecemeal enactment of legislation. The bits that don't require money get enacted very quickly. The bits that require some investment take a bit longer. So we can have a piecemeal enactment of legislation, and I see some people in the audience nodding their heads, so we have experience of that, I think, and a shared experience. But the interesting thing about this legislation is that it repealed a piece of legislation from the 1800s. You may know the history of Ireland. We were under direct rule from London until 1923. We're an independent republic. We're made up of 26 counties. The north of Ireland is part of the UK. That's the 6 at the top. So when you see a map of Ireland with a big line, that's somewhere else. So in the Republic of Ireland, we had the Lunacy Act from the 1800s that really had to be replaced. But we also had to have something that defined capacity. And in speaking with colleagues yesterday, I advised them that the unfortunate thing about the piece of legislation, even though it's only 3 years written, when we apply the capacity measure and definition that our wonderful legislators gave us, about 50% of the population would not meet the measure of capacity. So they had to go back to the drawing board with that bit. But it did a lot of good things. It applies in its finding to every health and social care professional, but also every health and social care setting, which is fantastic because it covers the place that you call the place of care. It may be still your own home if you're well enough to live there with good supports. It may be a residential care centre, a shared care facility. It enshrines in law the rights to self-determine, bearing in mind that there are different and myriad reflections on what we mean when we call the thing autonomy, that right to self-determination, that right to self-rule, taken from the Greek autonomos. It redefines what we mean when we talk about enduring power of attorney, where somebody is given the legal right to make decisions on your behalf when you no longer have capacity. But it also enshrines in law that once a conversation has happened, then somebody can actually direct for their care, which then becomes the guide for healthcare professionals and social care professionals, and family indeed, as to what should happen in the event I'm not able to make decisions for myself. It's interesting in that it also allows this legislation for a co-decision maker. So I can identify a specific individual who doesn't have to be related to me through sanguinity, but rather can be somebody I trust. Yes, it can be a family member, but it's somebody I trust who will make those decisions with me and also will take over the burden of making those decisions when I lose my capacity. The document in the middle is the Guide to Ethical and Professional Practice for Medical Practitioners. Okay, I'm a nurse, and I also follow a code of conduct. But what I like about the Medical Code of Conduct is that it is written so that anybody can read it and understand it. So it's written in plain English, and you'll see some examples on the next few slides. But what it does is that it calls the medical practitioner, and I would argue all health and social care professionals, to think carefully about engaging in conversations about preferences, wishes, and wants when it comes to healthcare, but also when it comes to other types of care. And finally, 2 years ago, our health service executive, which is responsible for the day-to-day running of our health services, published a national policy on consent, which mirrors a lot of what the professional guides and codes of ethics are saying, but really structures how we actually engage with people and obtain consent to intervene or not. So what did the Code of Ethics for Medical Practitioners say? All contained in Chapter 3 in 3 different sections. Some would say that this statement that sometimes patients would want to make plans for their medical treatment, which may come into effect when they lose capacity in the future. It suggests that plans may include advanced refusals of medical treatment or requests for specific procedures. The reason they focus on the refusal is that our Constitution, which is the supreme law of our state, is very clear that you have the right to refuse. And it's implied in an article which allows us for free thinking and free decision making, and we should be allowed to do that without let or hindrance. As a professional, I should do my best to help and support patients who ask for my assistance in writing their healthcare plan in advance. What we should be asking is patients who might have a long-term condition or conditions that are likely to be life-limiting, affect their quality of life, and will require continuous and constant intervention. Some suggest that it's a little bit prescriptive. It goes on, having asked us to engage in the conversation, it goes on to suggest that we should make a plan. And that plan can be an advanced healthcare plan or a directive. And that in itself, they say, has the same status as a decision that's made with the patient in conversation, in partnership, in collaboration. It's important, I think, that if somebody does refuse treatment, that they're doing it knowing what the treatment is about and having an informed choice to refuse. Now, one of my colleagues who works in UCD, he's a medical professor, Dennis Cusack is his name. He runs the Medical Bureau of Traffic, believe it or not. Does a lot of research on road traffic accidents. And he's actually the coroner for the county of Kildare, which is the county just next door to Dublin. And he would argue that none of us, unless we are licensed professionals, can make a fully informed choice about treatment, which is quite a strong claim. And if we think about it and tease it out, we as practitioners or people who volunteer and have close collaborative relationships with people who are experiencing the need for continuous care would say, well, we have a lot of knowledge, so we know what's going on. And sometimes our family rely on us to interpret that knowledge. But what about the person who isn't a healthcare professional or doesn't have the benefit of having a relation who is a healthcare professional? How much do we need to share with them in order for us to be sure that they're making an informed choice? In Ireland, the law says that the physician must give as much knowledge as the ordinary person needs to make that decision. So it's almost a baseline. You need to give the information that the person understands in order for them to make that informed choice. However, as the most litigious society in the world when it comes to healthcare per person capita, a lot of the issues that come before our courts in relation to health are that I signed a consent form for intervention, but I didn't understand what I was signing for. Yet, we would argue that when somebody is told they're giving informed consent to intervention. The decision, they say, that directive, which has the same stance as a request for refusal of treatment, covers a situation that has arisen at that time. However, it is important to recognise that the person has the right to change their mind, and therefore a conversation about advanced care is not a one-stop shop. It's a continuous interactive process that stretches over time and has multiple times of speaking, reviewing, revising. There's always a get-out clause for us as professionals, and the get-out clause here from the Medical Council in Ireland is that we're not obliged to provide treatment that is not clinically indicated for a particular patient. And basically what they're saying is that we need to be very careful and reflect that at all times, any interaction that the person has as a patient, client, or service user is for their best interests. And that it's supportive, it's collaborative, we're decision-making together, and it's person-centered. You hear the term patient-centered all the time, but actually we need to look at it as a person-centeredness. That the person is person with humanity and humanhood and personhood before they were diagnosed and have a list of symptoms and signs as long as our arm. And that person comes from a community. That person comes with their cultural and ethical bias, with what it means to them when it comes to choices, decisions, conversations. And these conversations may not be automatic. They can be problematic. They can be considered difficult. Interestingly, I teach medical students and I teach them communication, and I teach them about how to engage in the conversations that are difficult and how we break bad news. The interesting thing is I'm not allowed to teach the medical students in the university where I work. I teach the medical students in our competitor university, Trinity College. That kind of interests me because what did I do wrong to not be allowed to engage with my medical colleagues in the university where I work? But I do take pleasure in going to Trinity and saying they couldn't find anybody with the skills to teach this in Trinity, so they had to get somebody from the opposition to come and teach. I think when we consider planning ahead, we need to be planning ahead for the unexpected happenings. And I asked the question, what if you were diagnosed with a life-limiting and chronic condition like dementia, or like heart failure, or like respiratory disease, or a significant disease of the brain? It will take us a while to adjust, I would suggest. And we may decide that we want to plan ahead, or we may not. We may take the approach of the ostrich, the poor ostrich that gets blamed for putting their head in the sand. That surprise, the taking time to adjust. Sometimes patients will have guessed. They'll have guessed that something's not right. They'll have guessed that they need to see a doctor. They'll have guessed that actually this is worse than I presumed. I waited because I knew this was bad news. I stopped myself going to the doctor because I didn't want my suspicion confirmed. But when they do come to us as professionals, they're coming seeking advice. They're coming to confirm their suspicion, but also to seek guidance as to what they're going to do and start to plan. Start to plan for care that might intervene, to possibly cure, to slow the progression of the disease. But they're looking for somebody to support and somebody to ask questions. I talked yesterday about my own experience with patients, having worked in Our Lady's Hospice in Harold's Cross with Philip in clinical but also in administration. And having come from an acute setting, an acute medical setting, I was the bane of my medical colleagues' lives because I insisted that patients would write down questions that they could ask when the team did their ward rounds, and have one key question and one follow-up, because rounds happen very quickly. And then have further questions that can be asked when the more junior member of the team came back to do some on-ward work with us later. What are we planning for exactly? Is it about organising my finances? Now, can I be very Irish and be a redhead from the west of Ireland and ask a very inquisitive and nosy question? How many of you have made a will, your last will and testament, identifying what you want done with your property after you've died? How many of you have decided who's getting your house, who's inheriting the mortgage, who's getting the access to your funds? So a vast number of us. Yeah? Isn't it wonderful we've planned ahead about who's getting what and who can fight over what we've left behind? I joke with my husband that I'm worth more when I die than I am now, and that he has 5 days to grieve because that's the length of time the cheque will take to clear, and then he can party all he wants. How many of you have talked about your health and what things you want or thought about for the future should things arise? Well, it's great to see hands going up. You know you're all involved in palliative care. Yeah? Very few. There's about a third less have advanced care planning thinking. I've had that conversation. We have a wonderful system in Ireland with regards to extended care and residential care for older persons. And these sites are inspected on a yearly basis by our Health Information Quality Authority. And the inspection reports go live on their website and the responses from the site that's been inspected. So I've already ticked the ones, I'm not going there, I'm not going there, I'll think about going there, based on what their inspection reports are, but also based on the fact that, yeah, I know I'll get a shower every day if I'm sent there. I know they have a drinks trolley that comes around at 3 p.m. in the evening, that I can get a nice gin and tonic before dinner and have a glass of wine with my dinner. So I've had that conversation. It probably should be a bit more depth, but we've started it. And I suppose if we have started those conversations, have we actually picked the person that we trust will know what we want? Yeah. Yeah, more of us have done that. Yeah. Again, I'm very lucky because my husband is a mental health nurse, so they have a bit of knowledge. I do slag him that he's not a real nurse because he's not a general nurse, but we get over that. And I really do think that, you know, yes, I'm making some fun about this, but the point I'm making is that we tend to spend lots of time organizing our finances and, you know, what will pay for what and who'll get what, but we haven't planned for the other things with as much emphasis and as much care and attention. And if we haven't done it, and we're the professionals, how the hell do we expect patients, clients, service users, and families to do it? If we're going to advocate for people to have conversations, to plan for the future, surely we should be the par exemple excellence of that, of the person who's done it. And really what we're talking about is planning for the rest of our life. We're planning for the rest of our lives. We're taking time to discuss, to plan, because guess what? We will all die. We don't know when, we don't know how, and we don't know what happens after we take the last breath. But it's an experience that we as human beings will all share. But we do a lot of living before we get to that point of dying. And we should be planning how we're going to live. We should be planning about what is happy for us, what it is that will make me happier if something like an illness is diagnosed for me that is going to affect my quality of life. I want to share with you a clip, and hopefully the technology will work. The Irish Hospice Foundation is an advocacy group in Ireland which advocates and sings the song and meets the politicians to say hospice and palliative care is good and we need to improve it, and we need to constantly improve it. And one of the things they did was they promoted the concept of thinking ahead. Thinking ahead, thinking about the future. And I want to show you a video that they made just to get us to actually into that mode of thinking ahead.
Every life is a journey. Unpredictable, brimming with possibility, and inevitably it comes to an end. And so we plan. To make time for laughter, and tears. To keep our heads above water and our feet on the ground. What if tomorrow you couldn't speak? Who would know your wishes? How to care for you? When enough is enough. These are decisions that you should make for yourself. Our simple form helps you start the conversation. So if something unexpected happens, the people you love will know what you would like them to do. Visit thinkahead.ie. All the information and resources you need are on the site. Think ahead. Have you done it yet?
Peut-être vous aider. En tout cas, un grand merci pour ce clip.
So, simple example of getting people to think ahead, getting people to engage. They say think, talk, plan, document, revise. 5 simple steps. We think about it, we talk about it, we write it down as our plan, and then we revise it on a regular basis. And that brings me very nicely into what it is an advanced care plan is. And for the next few slides, I'm going to focus on the work that we did with the EAPC, where we started to define what an advanced care plan was. And being the wonderful workers we were, we have 2 definitions. We have the extended definition, and then we have the short definition, and I'm focusing on the short definition here. So what we said that advanced care planning was, is it allows us and enables individuals to define goals and preferences, which is really important. And those are goals and preferences for their future medical treatment and care. And it also enables a discussion about these goals and preferences with their family, with healthcare providers, and then recording and reviewing these preferences when and if appropriate. And I suppose I would add that it's healthcare, but it's also social care, and it's also other care that might be needed for me as I age, but age healthily. What does it include? We say it's an inclusive process, and it allows the identification of values. What is it that is important to me? It allows me to identify what are my goals in respect of my journey through my life, and if that journey is tempered with a diagnosis of a condition which is going to impact my life, what are my goals? Initially, it might be a goal to cure, or that research will suddenly find a cure for what I have because I have a disease that is very strange, very new and nuanced. It also talks about what are my preferences? Where is it I'd like to be cared for? You know, probably somebody similar to the cities here in France. We have a number of acute centres for care, and I'd be very clear about which ones I don't want to be brought if I'm brought in an ambulance. I'd also have a wonderful sentiment that was shared to me by a colleague who happened to have an accident at work, and it was a wonderful sentiment of expression of what we expect from our healthcare. And she was transferred from the university where she had a significant fall resulting in a severe back injury, and was transferred to the hospital down the road from us, which is one of the partner hospitals that work with us in the university. And her abiding sentiment was, when the ambulance door opened, is that the face I want to see? And is that the face that I can trust to mind me, to look after me? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we were that person chosen to actually start, continue, and promote the conversations that we need to plan for our future care? It allows that discussion then to happen. It allows us to document those preferences. And also, advanced care planning suggests that we might need to appoint a proxy decision maker, where it's appropriate, where it's applicable, but also where there is a legal framework that enables it. And that proxy decision maker can be called a co-decision maker, or somebody who will take over decision making if I'm not able to do it. So what are the things we need to consider? And apologies for this slide, it's very wordy. But it should not be seen as a one-time only thing. We should be doing it as an ongoing, as a continuous, as an interactive. It doesn't focus only on the physical. We need to be mindful of the holistic nature of who we are. The physical, the psychological, the social, the spiritual, and the emotional. All of those things and traits that make us the human beings that we are. It happens when the person requests it, and the conversation is conducted at the patient's pace. It really should happen with those who understand the patient's wishes. That's the co-decision maker, particularly if that person who is the patient doesn't have capacity. It's mindful of best interest, and it's not limited to any particular patient group. Ideally, we should be doing it to everybody who's diagnosed with an illness. Ideally, we should be doing it ourselves for our own future. I would suggest that we're having these conversations every single day of our working lives, but we need to actually get writing them down, keeping a record of them so that we know what's happening. I'm nearly there. Who's it for? Patients, families, healthcare professionals. It's everybody's business. It's something that we need to get out there into the universe, that thinking, talking, writing it down, planning is everybody's business, and we should be doing it as a matter of course. Yes, healthcare professionals have a place to play, a part to play, and have the skills to engage in those conversations, in as much as those who are not healthcare professionals have a part to play. And we talk about that in the paper, that it is an option to have a trained person who's not a physician or a nurse, but has the skills, willingness, and ability to engage in these conversations. It's about respecting wishes. It's about improving the continuity of care right up to and including end of life. It's ensuring that we know the wishes, the preferences, and the desires. And also, if we follow the desires, we can impact on healthcare costs and meet a requirement of our legislators with regards to they want things to happen with minimum or no cost, and we can do that. And I'm looking at Helena because she wants to give me time for questions. I do think it's important that we be consistent in what we do. We're mindful that it is about respecting the person, respecting where they are functionally, making and allowing them to make an informed decision. Not necessarily our bigotry, but it should be something of good practice. Important that we recognise we cannot be obliged to carry out futile or what we consider unethical or illegal treatment. And it really is about initiating the conversation as early as possible and mindful, yes, we're doing it, but we need to be absolutely articulate, yes, we're doing it, and document that we're doing it so that everybody knows and everybody sings from the same hymn sheet. Apologies for going over my presentation time.
Merci Michael. Merci beaucoup. Je vais vous inviter à me rejoindre. Alors j'imagine que vous avez beaucoup de questions, donc n'hésitez pas à lever la main. On va vous apporter tout de suite des micros. Donc qui pose la première? Alors en attendant, vous avez signalé donc, que l'on pouvait changer d'avis. À quelle fréquence est-ce que vous avez des conseils à nous donner? Quand est-ce qu'il faut reparler des directives anticipées aux patients? Quand est-ce qu'il faut réinterroger leurs souhaits?
Yeah. There are times and there's significant moments where we see a change in condition, where we see the person may be re-hospitalized more often, may have noticed, they come for their regular outpatients appointment. In the 10-15 minutes we have with them, we may take a weight and see that there's a weight loss. We may see that there's some functional incapacity. So there are moments when along the trajectory of the illness when there's a change that is noticeable that allows us back in for the conversation. Because if somebody has a life-limiting condition, they're going to be coming to lots of appointments and they're going to be seen on a regular basis, one would hope. And at those moments when we see a significant change or decline in functional ability, then we can actually re-enter the conversation. Or the person themselves might want to say, I need to talk to you again about.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Une question ou par écrit, si vous le préférez? Oui, madame.
Thank you, Michael, for your presentation. A question about, so there's people in the room that would probably say, we have these conversations and we know about advanced directives. So what's the difference between a country who has formalized advanced care planning? What's the importance of health authorities, hospitals, institutions having policy and formalizing advanced care planning, as opposed to just doing it?
Yeah. It's enabling the conversations to be documented. That's what it's about. The Advanced Care Directive is wonderful because it legalizes a directive that is enshrined. But in order to get to that directive, a conversation has to have happened. How do we know the conversation has happened? What's the extent of the conversation? Is it a deep conversation or is it just a peripheral view? What advanced care planning allows us to do is to start the conversation earlier, allow it to actually be part and parcel of the care we provide on an ongoing basis. And it's not just the bit at the end where you say, look, you're getting really, really unwell. If the worst happens, do you want to be resuscitated? Do you want to be transferred to hospital? Do you want this, that, and the other? The problem I suppose I have with an advanced directive, it tends to focus on what I don't want. Whereas an advanced care plan allows us to focus on the more positive. Well, this is what I would like. This is what I desire. This is my preference. But I'm happy then at the end to discuss a clear directive of where I want to go. But the care plan starting early. You know, we plan for other things. Why not plan for our future? Not just our health future, but our care future. What I'd like, what I want. And allow an expression and a documented expression of my values, my preferences, and my desires going forward until I need to put it down as a directive, which is to be followed absolutely.
OK.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Oui.
Merci,
Mike.
Présentez, s'il vous plaît.
Emmanuel Bagagaza, ingénieur de recherche à Jeanne Garnier. Thank you, Mike. I just would like to that you can explain more difference between advanced care planning and advanced care directive, because sometimes they can be confused.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you, Emmanuel, that there is the conflation and confusion, and sometimes we use the two terms to mean the same thing. They're not. An advanced care plan is a long trajectory of interaction. It's multiple conversations which are documented and recorded, where preferences may change, whereas advanced care directive is a very clear, written down direction that healthcare professionals must follow in respect of this and this and this. And that's the very significant difference for me is that the conversation is continuous, it is not time limited, the preferences, the values, and the desires can change. You know, when we talk to people who've been diagnosed first with a life-limiting condition, we have the research from Ireland that says the preference for care is I want to die at home with my loving family around me in my own bed. But that preference can change as I progress through the illness, and I'm having multiple admissions in and out of hospital, and the burden of care is becoming greater and greater and greater, and I don't want my family to have that burden. I also don't want my family remembering that's where I died, and having to maybe wrestle with selling the house where their mum or dad or brother or aunt or uncle lived and died. So by re-engaging in conversations, we might find that the preference and the value has changed. I know a group in Ireland who engage in conversations. They're from the travelling community, the Romani community, the travelling community in Ireland. They do not want to have anything to do with hospice. They see that as loss of hope. They don't mind dying in hospital. But they'll talk to you about those preferences very early on in their diagnosis because they want you to understand, I'm not going anywhere except a hospital to die. I'm not dying at home. I'm not dying in a hospice. This is where I'm going to die. So I think there's a cultural aspect. I think it's about recognizing that the advanced care plan conversation is continuous over a long period of time, where preferences and desires and values change as the person progresses through their life, but also if they're living with a life-limiting condition as they progress through that illness trajectory. The directive is a very clear statement of intent of what I want and don't want, which is encapsulated and enshrined in legislation here in France, but also where I come from in Ireland.
Merci beaucoup. Une autre question? Madame.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Julia Revnik, je suis médecin à la maison médicale Jeanne Garnier en équipe mobile. J'aurais voulu vous demander si vous n'avez pas l'impression que parfois, organiser le futur empêche de vivre le présent.
That's a really interesting question. Can I give you an example from my own life? And I shared this, and apologies for repeating myself, I shared this with the group that I facilitated yesterday afternoon. My mum died the year I turned 40. And my birthday is in February, and her birthday is in April. And she died on her birthday. We never had a structured conversation But she lived her life right to the very end. She had her last cigarette on the morning that she had a massive MI, where she was hospitalized on the Tuesday afternoon. And she had smoked since she was 14. And she lived for her cigarette. And what struck me about knowing my mother was, without having a conversation that would maybe impact on her living her life, we all knew her wishes. So when she had her heart attack in my sister's home and was transferred to the ICU of the nearest hospital, I arrived just as they were about to put in a long line and start interventional therapy. And I asked them to stop, that we would like to have a conversation. And I suppose what that did was it allowed us to actually relive my mother's life for a while, seeing how much she lived, but allowing us to make a decision that, no, this is not what she would want. So how do I correlate that with your question around having a conversation about the future might stop impeding somebody living? I would argue that having the conversation can actually strengthen the person's resolve to live a bit longer, because we're giving them and recognizing their values, preferences, and desires, and their desire to see their grandchild being born, the desire to see their relative getting married, the desire to go to Disneyland Paris one more time, so that when we know the values and preferences, we can add to their living and not take from it. I would argue that if we understand the values, the preferences, and desires, and expose them, which I would suggest we do every single day, we're actually intentionalizing their life and living, and not detracting from it or removing any hope.
Merci beaucoup. Madame?
Oui, bonjour, Axel Vanlander, psychologue. Est-ce que vous avez fait une recherche, parce que vous avez pour le coup du recul par rapport aux directives anticipées, est-ce que vous avez fait une recherche sur les conséquences potentiellement néfastes de l'application des directives anticipées? Moi, ce que je repère en fait en France, c'est que sur les directives anticipées, c'est très standardisé. On a un peu des checklists, et puis les gens cochent. Et j'ai très peur par la suite des déceptions en fait des familles par rapport à ce qu'ils avaient pu noter. Évidemment qu'ils veulent toujours le plus, le mieux, et que ce mieux n'est pas toujours réalisable. Il faut qu'ils puissent se représenter en fait le pire, et se représenter le pire n'est pas toujours possible. Donc cette checklist me paraît parfois un peu idéalisée et voire déconnectée des possibilités réelles.
Merci.
I'd agree with you to a certain extent. We haven't done and seen any research in Ireland, but I do believe that the Irish Hospice Foundation are looking to actually look at this issue because of their Think Ahead campaign, which was about advanced care planning, which also advised that there is an advanced care directive available to use and now is legislated for. The Irish Hospice Foundation, in its wisdom, has established the End of Life Forum. And that meets every year, and it draws the great and the good from across Ireland. It's chaired by a former Supreme Court Justice. And one of the things they're looking at is establishing a research study to look at the use of advanced care planning and also the use of advanced care directives and how that has impacted on care. But it's something in the future. I suppose we only have the legislation for the last 3 years, so it's something that we now can look at, and I know my colleagues in the Irish Hospice Foundation are going to fund that in the next year or so. I've had a conversation recently with the CEO in that regard, and then we'll have some evidence from my country. Other countries, not quite sure if there's anything been happening. I suspect that there's something been done in relation to some work in some of the states in the United States. When we developed the white paper and we did the literature trawl, what we were really looking for was advanced care planning guidelines as opposed to advanced care directive. But we did have to mention the ACD because some of the members of the working group were coming from countries that had established legislation for it. But it would be a magnificently interesting study, and I think if we could do it in multi-centre, where we're seeing advanced care directives being used, it would add so much to our knowledge base.
Merci. Alors nous avons le temps pour une ou deux questions encore au fond de la salle.
Docteur Cornement, je suis médecin en équipe mobile dans l'Est de la France. J'ai eu l'occasion de visiter votre beau pays cet été et je planifie pour l'année prochaine. Deux questions. nous, la personne de confiance en France a un rôle de porte-parole de la personne malade. Votre tiers de confiance a-t-il un rôle décisionnaire si le patient ne peut plus? Et la deuxième question, est-ce qu'il y a une traçabilité structurée de votre conversation au fil du temps?
Yes and yes. So, what they've called it is a co-decision maker. And the idea behind it is that this is the person who has ultimate trust of the person who's the patient, client, or service user. And they know them intimately. And it was very clear that it wasn't always going to be a possible member of the family. The wonderful thing about Ireland is that we have no legislative definition of next of kin. So it's assumed that next of kin is, if you're married, it's your spouse. If you're not married, it's your sanguine relation. But what we've tried to do is say that the person, and we use the broadest terminology for family. So family is whoever the patient says it is, and is not just a sanguine relationship. And the person who's the patient, who has capacity, will choose who they want as their core decision maker, who has all the rights and responsibilities under law that the person themselves have. Yeah? The other thing that you asked was about going back to the conversation. Yes, and we encourage that at times and points that I mentioned previously when there is a subtle change or a change in my capacity, my functional capacity, a change in symptomatology, additional things that have to happen with regards to managing my condition that cause us to look again. So it's a continuity, it's a continuous all the time, and there is a possibility of changing, adapting, restructuring, rewriting at any stage.
Merci. Une dernière question?
Bonjour, Claudine Mahari, je suis médecin en unité de soins palliatifs à Paris. Ma question est sur, à force de demander aux gens ce qu'ils veulent, est-ce que parfois on ne se retrouve pas dans le paradoxe de ne pas pouvoir répondre à leurs demandes? Et du coup, est-ce qu'on n'est pas parfois face à une hypocrisie de leur dire qu'est-ce que vous voulez faire? On va faire en sorte de vous écouter, mais au bout du compte, on ne peut pas le faire. Je cite juste l'exemple que vous avez vous-même énoncé, qui est le décès à domicile, qui, voilà, on a beau vouloir mourir dans son lit entouré de sa famille, et parfois c'est juste pas possible. Et du coup, voilà.
Absolutely. Maybe I should say that what I tend to suggest is that the question should be phrased in, what is it we can do for you that will improve or make things better for you? And with the codicil that, and we'll do that as much as we can, because it's not always, we can't always do everything. And we can't all, and I think being honest with the person, say, I'm asking you this question, bearing in mind that we will try as best we can. For example, we developed in Ireland a referral pathway to specialist palliative care, but we also developed a discharge policy from specialist palliative care. We also identified a specific needs assessment to guide our non-specialist palliative carers into whether or not this person can be managed by them using an approach rather than always constantly going to specialist palliative care, when actually, in fact, it may not be needed. But I do think you're right to highlight the reality that sometimes the desire, the wish, the preference, we may not be able to meet it because of the constraints of the system we work in. But I think being honest and upfront is the name of the game when we come to that.
Merci, merci beaucoup, Michael Connolly. On vous applaudit très fort. Merci.